We've had a number of questions from homeschool parents about taking care of the state requirements for homeschoolers while studying in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and I'm sure that parents getting started in the academy would imagine that there's going to be some kind of trouble providing their local superintendent's office or the state board of education with whatever documentation is required of them. And I'd like to talk about this a little bit. I'd like to talk about this at the macro level to discuss some issues that relate to this whole concern about satisfying the requirements of state government, and then work down to the micro level and talk about the specific requirements and activities that parents need to take care of and how they are handled in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. And so let me just give a little bit of a macro level generalized talk, and then we'll work down to the details. It's important for parents to understand that I come from a different background than most people involved in Catholic education, especially in Catholic homeschool education. First of all, I was raised as a public school student. So I went to public school from preschool all the way through high school graduation. Did all of my testing, standardized testing, SAT prep, all of that, the whole system I went through. And then when I finished high school, I went and studied at Rutgers University, which is a large public state university. I had a secular education all the way through to the completion of my degree studies, but I was a Christian, and yet the educational environment I grew up in and worked through was always secular. And I say that because I think that for many Catholic parents, especially many Catholic homeschool parents, may not have had that experience, may not have grown up in a secular school, may not have attended a public university or a state university. And so I think for many Catholic families, that world of public school education, public school administration, state education law is a world that they're not familiar with. Then what I fear happens is the political controversy of the day is injected into that situation, and all of this conspiracy theory type talk begins to direct their thoughts, and they imagine that the state is like this, and the superintendent is trying to do this, and the universities want to take away our rights for this, and there's all of this fear and uncertainty that develops. And I can say that as one who went through the public school system, went to a public university, and knew people all through these systems, can think back and remember the superintendent of schools has worked with people like this while I was growing up as a student. And being educated, I attended the Rutgers University Graduate School of Education. I chose not to finish that program because I decided that I wasn't going to need a master's degree in education because I was going to work in private school education, and I was going to work for myself. But I was even in the graduate school of education where the school principals and superintendents get trained, and I never had a difficult time. I never felt like I was being pressured as a Christian. The professors I had were pretty good people. Some of them were extremely good people that helped me a great deal. Those who were not Christians were respectful in the sense that they would welcome a good argument. I'm not saying that they loved Christianity or were open. No, I'm saying that they understood that people have different views and that their view isn't allowed to run the show. And they respected diversity. And I, as a Christian, that's all I asked for. I just asked that they respect my beliefs and convictions. And I was very comfortable making them known. But all of that education experience, I never really had any experience where I felt like there was someone or something to be feared. When I went into education, I worked in private schools, and they were elite private schools, so we understood very clearly that the education that we provided at our private schools was a level above and beyond what the public schools required, and there was very little talk of state evaluations, state interference, because we exceeded state requirements, and it was just a non-issue. We were worried about other things. Then when I went into education myself, there's one brief story that I'd like to share that I don't know if many people are aware of, but when I was teaching down here in Charlotte, before I started the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, the pastor or the priest at our church asked my wife and I if we'd be willing to help him with the project. And the priest wanted to start a preschool in the parish, and he needed some help doing that. So he asked us if we would help him to get a preschool established. And we wanted it to be a licensed preschool because our parish has a lot of financially needy families, and we were hoping that if we brought the preschool into compliance with the state regulations for facilities and all that kind of stuff, personnel training, that the preschool could qualify for financial assistance for poor families in the parish. And so I was asked to direct that development of a licensed preschool, and I spent a year working on that. So I had to deal with all of the state inspectors and regulators that were coming in. They had to go over, believe it or not, the curriculum that we had prepared for the children, because it was going to be an academic preschool, all through the facilities, bringing everything up to code. And I had to fight a bit on behalf of the church because there were a few points where inspectors were being lazy, or we were told something was required that actually wasn't required. And so I had to go and dig into the codes and the laws and the regulations to make sure that everything that we were being told was in fact right, because the church didn't have any money to waste, and we couldn't afford to invest in a project that wasn't necessary. And so finally we had the preschool up and running, and everything was going well, and it was then that I decided to start the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. And so I sort of moved from my private school teaching job through that temporary project to help our priest, and then once that was running, and I had hired some teachers for the preschool, and one woman in particular I had trained to take my place. Once that was all set and running, we just handed it off and moved on. But I had to work through all of this inspection process and regulations and licensing requirements and everything. And through that whole process, we had nothing but support from the state, nothing but positive help. They were willing to work with us to allow things to develop slowly. They weren't annoyed when I challenged them on things, and they when there were two options, one that they preferred but another one that was better for us and possible, they would go along with the one that was better for us. So I never experienced anything in working with the state in terms of educational licensing, administration, regulation, other than support. I never had a bad experience with any of the inspectors or regulators. So that was another experience where working with the state, I found nothing but support. Then going forward a few more years, you might know that I started a boarding school here in Monroe when we had an opportunity to purchase a property just around the block from our home. We bought a piece of property that had a building on it that we believed we could use to start a little private school. And so we needed to get this school building approved by the state so that we could operate a private school. So we had to do the whole thing all over again. We had to go through the facilities inspections and improvements, all kinds of silly upgrades that were needed on the building. We had to put handicap-friendly water fountains in. We had to move around the bathroom and change the wall the door was in so that a wheelchair could access the bathroom. All the usual inspection type accessibility requirements. We complied with it all. We explained to the inspectors what our plans were, because our plans were pretty radical. We're talking to modern school inspectors, and we're telling them how we'd like the boys to be able to work on the farm. We'd like to milk cows. We'd like to have gardens. We'd like them to eat from the gardens and produce their own food. And all these things we went through, and they thought it was cool. They were supportive. But then we ran into one snare, as it were, or roadblock, I should say. And it was that our building was actually pretty big. And the law states that if we're going to use a facility, that the whole facility has to be brought up to maximum occupation and be inspected and approved as a whole building. And unfortunately, our building was capable, according to their algorithms, our building was capable of serving 100 students. And in order to have 100 students, the requirements for septic and bathroom facilities multiplied. And there was no way we could do that. Just no way. We had no financial resources and couldn't do it. So I decided to read through the building code myself and see what the actual requirements were. And I found that the problem was that we had doors on opposite sides of the building, and therefore the building was considered as a whole. And so I decided to pitch a question to the building inspector, and I asked him, if we put a wall up in the middle of the building that divided the building and turned it into what was basically a double residence facility with two opposite entries, and we treated it as such, could we then treat half of the building as the school facility and leave the other as a storage facility? And as crazy as that idea sounded, the building inspector went along with it and approved the plan and approved the inspection. And we were able to open the school. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because we were pursuing a radical Christian school plan that was nothing like the inspectors had ever seen or heard of before. And all we received was support and help from the state inspectors. Never a difficulty, just support and help. And we were able to get the school approved and opened a private school. A few years later, a friend of mine, Jared Hazelbarth, and I decided to pursue something else. We wanted to see if we could receive permission from the state, from the University of North Carolina's Board of Governors, to offer a bachelor degree from our school through the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. And so we put together the curriculum, submitted it for review, and were approved by the state to offer a bachelor degree in classical Christian studies. And again, the reason why I'm sharing this is to show you that time and time again, when I have interacted with state education inspectors and regulations in promoting the classical liberal arts, in promoting Catholic education, I have had nothing but support and encouragement and approval. I don't think parents realize, homeschooling parents, I don't think they realize how much experience we've had working with state education boards and inspectors and all of this, and they think the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is some kind of wild animal that's breaking all the rules. And the reality is it's not so. And I share all of these stories to encourage parents to get rid of the nervousness and the anxiety and the fear about the state coming in and trying to get us in trouble. It's not like that at all. The state does not operate like that. And I would be willing to argue that if you've heard bad stories about the state, doing something to Christians or giving Christians a hard time, you need to get all the details. Because I have seen with my own eyes Christians doing things that deserved to be punished by the state. And then they pretend like the state is attacking them, when the state is simply enforcing the laws. And the laws are good. And if you go and read your Bible, Romans chapter 13 tells us that as Christians we're supposed to comply with the laws, unless the laws explicitly contradict God's commandments. And these laws about educational requirements and things like that do not in any way violate God's law. So all of that talk is just nonsense party politics that needs to be ignored. So I want you to start with a positive, optimistic attitude towards the state and towards the government and towards regulation when you consider homeschooling. Don't allow your mind to be poisoned by this gossip news stuff and conspiracy theory stuff and party politics. That's not what the state, the inspectors and the representatives, it's not what they're like. If you show yourself willing to comply, willing to satisfy the requirements, which are usually very reasonable and just. They might be inconvenient. They might, in the case of our private school, be expensive and require significant financial investment, but they're reasonable and just. And one of the benefits of these regulations, when it requires us to quote unquote jump through hoops is that it tests our sincerity. It tests whether or not we're actually interested in education, or whether people are just looking to use education as a way to make some money. By making people invest and upgrade facilities, it proves that we're actually interested in running a school. And when we're told that this or this makes the place safer for the children, we're willing to comply for the sake of the children. So I think the regulations need to be understood as a good thing and not as some kind of persecution or stealing away of our rights as citizens and all that nonsense. Have a positive, optimistic attitude towards the state and the government, and don't listen to the poisonous party politic gossip news stuff that's all over the internet and all through Christian communities. If you're not willing to walk forward with a positive, optimistic attitude, but you're going to go forward with this ignorant, suspicious spirit, then there's nothing that I can say to you. You're probably going to get into trouble. And what I would ask you is, why do you have that spirit? Why do you think that people are out to get you? Why do you think the state has an interest in penalizing parents who want to educate their children? I think there's something wrong that leads people to have that attitude. And I warn you that there's a proverb in sacred scripture that says, the wicked man flees when no one pursues him, but the righteous man is as bold as a lion. I find that many Christians live, as it were, in hiding, running away from fears and dangers that don't even exist. They flee when no one pursues them. Everything is fine, and they're hiding out like they're under attack or that they're being watched. That spirit, that's not a Christian spirit. And if you have that spirit, this suspicious, scared, timid, nervous spirit, that's a spiritual problem that needs to be overcome, because it's just not true. The government's not trying to come and get you. The government has simple, published requirements that you need to comply with. And if you look at them, they're very simple. And again, I don't think people read the documents and read the laws and read the statutes and regulations. Read them. They're not difficult. And there are very often provisions for different circumstances and all kinds of options in different circumstances. And Christians just need to know how the laws apply to their circumstances. That's all the government's concerned with. The people working in the government are paid workers. Very few of them are, pursuing some agenda. Most of them, when you think about it, we complain about government workers. We complain that they're lazy, that they really don't do any work, that they're way overpaid, that they don't even care. If that's true, and I would actually argue that is more the character of the government workers, in the sense that they're just doing a job. They're there for a paycheck. It's their job. They're not there to serve some personal agenda. They're not there as some kind of undercover agent working on some secret mission to attack Christian family. Most of them are just there for a paycheck. They've got a job to do. They're going to come knock on the door. They've got a checklist of tasks that they're required to take care of to get their paycheck, and all they're looking for is a friendly face who goes along with the evaluation. They can check all the boxes for and say, thank you, bye-bye, get back in their car and leave. So give the state the benefit of the doubt. Most of the time, even if there is a problem, they're just going to tell you what needs to be fixed and give you a chance to take care of it. They're not going to come with handcuffs like Nazi officers, and if they find anything not in compliance, lock you up and drive you away. That's not what they're there for. For example, in our private school, we had times where there was a time where we had some chemicals on a counter. I think it was some cleaners, and that caused us to fail the inspection. But all that happened was they made a note of it, understood that it was not intentional, it wasn't a permanent problem. And the next time the inspection came around, they noted that the problem had been taken care of and everything was fine. They're not there to close the place down. You'll find the opposite. They're very helpful. So, the key to all of this that I'm trying to persuade you of is don't live with this poisoned, suspicious spirit, but have a positive, optimistic attitude and have some Christian courage. Aren't you doing good? You're honest, aren't you? You love your children, don't you? You're not interested in breaking laws, are you? You're just interested in doing good. And if you're just seeking to do good, and you're honest, and you love your children, and you're trying to give them the best education possible, what are you afraid of? You should have confidence that if before God you know your heart is pure, and your intentions are good, and everything you say is honest, you should be confident that all's going to be well. Now, let's start getting more specific. In the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, we teach a curriculum that's thousands of years old. More importantly, we teach a curriculum that existed before the Christian church was even established. We teach a secular curriculum. Our curriculum, if you read the article I published today, Aristotle and Classical Textbooks, you'll see that the subjects we teach, the textbooks we teach from, the original sources of the Classical Liberal Arts curriculum, were not even written by Christians. It's a secular curriculum. The reason why I say that is because one of the things the state does have some just concern about is that religious parents really be crazy wackos. I mean, there's a legitimate reason for a state inspector. You know, if there's a parent who says, you know, I believe that the planet Jupiter is an angel and is going to come to the earth in 2028 and take us away, and we're preparing our children to be ready for the coming of Jupiter, I would think that the state inspector would make a note of that and say, these folks are wacky. And there are many Christians who, by abandoning real historical Christian teaching and culture, or real Catholic faith and morals, get into all kinds of wacky, crazy ideas in the name of religion. And look, wackiness is going to get you in trouble. The state's going to be generous, but if things start getting wacky, you're going to get into trouble. For example, there are groups of Christians that have all kinds of crazy ideas about punishing children and things. There was a story about a Turpin family. You might have seen this back a few years, where they had children handcuffed to beds and chained up in the house and all kinds of craziness. That was all done in the name of Christianity. That was presented as being their Christian faith. But these folks were just nuts. And when the state steps in and says, whoa, 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 we know what Christianity is. I mean, we've got Catholic schools all through the state. We know what Christianity is. We've got Presbyterian and Anglican and Methodist schools, Baptist schools. None of them do this stuff. So how can you be claiming that this and this and this is Christian? And so we can't have this silly and unrealistic response when we hear that the state cracks down on people and doesn't listen to their talk about their Christian faith. The Christian faith is found in the Catholic Church. The state knows that there are hundreds of Catholic schools running and churches, and in America there are 70 million Catholics. Handcuffing your kids to the beds has nothing to do with Christianity. And so the state may look and crack down on stuff like that, and that's why you've got to be careful that you're living according to the true Catholic faith and not getting wrapped up into wackiness. And looking around the internet, it's pretty clear that there are many Catholics who are wrapped up in all kinds of wackiness. And that stuff's going to get you in trouble. And I don't believe that the state is necessarily wrong when they step in and say, something weird's going on over here. And you shouldn't have anything like that. If you read the Catechism of the Catholic Church and put that into practice, there's nothing weird in there. There's no kids chained to beds or locked in basements, locked in closets, starved until they're almost, unable to stand on their feet as part of their training in the fear of the Lord. That's craziness. So the state's going to seek, and as I said, the people who inspect and evaluate the homeschools, they really don't care about your religion. They really don't care what church you go to. They don't care what liturgy you prefer. They don't care if you think girls should wear head coverings at Mass, and if you think that we should pray facing the east. They don't care. The state inspector don't care about your religion. They're coming to see that you're providing your children with an education that's equivalent to the education that's available to your children in the public school system. And there's a reason for that. Your children, as the state sees your children, while they are your children, you only control them temporarily. They're not your possessions. They're not your slaves. You have authority over your children for 18 years, as long as they're living in your home and dependent on you. But your authority over your children is a temporary relationship. Your children are American citizens. Your children are citizens of the state in which they live. Your children have certain rights, political rights, legal rights, civil rights. And these things are real. Your authority over your children is temporary. As I said, 18 years, maybe 22 years, while the children go to college and need financial support. Your children then have 40, 50, 60 years of independent adulthood. And one of the things that the state makes sure of is that they're not being denied opportunities unreasonably and unfairly that are available to them as citizens. The state provides a solid K-12 college preparatory education for every American child at no cost to the children, simply because they're citizens. Your children have a right to that education and nothing less. And let me repeat that. Your children have a right to the quality of education that's available in the public school and nothing less. When you volunteer to homeschool, you make a promise that you're going to provide your child with an education that is at least equivalent to the quality of education available in the public school system. Now, the education that's available in the public school is a very low and minimal education. And there should be no problem exceeding the quality of education that's available in the public school. But at the same time, there is still a certain level of quality of education available in that public school. The kids at the public school do attend school 180 days a year from 8 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock in the morning. 7 hours a day for 180 days. Attendance is taken every day. They're not allowed to skip school. They're not allowed to miss days. And if they do miss a certain number of days, they're made to repeat the grade or go to summer school and make up the time. When they're in school, they have classes. They have 5, 6, 7 different academic subjects and classes through the day. They have teachers working for those courses. And these teachers are not philosophers. They're not doctors of the church. But they're going to work to cover material and test the kids. And it's important to see that there is a certain level of education that is available in the public school. And what the state is seeking through inspections of home schools, they're seeking to make sure that your children are not being denied access to an education that's theirs as American citizens. They're seeking to make sure that you give them something better, like you said you were going to do. The state is inspecting to make sure that you are, in fact, giving your children an education that's equivalent to or better than the education that's already available to them in the public school system. And you had better be able to demonstrate that you are, in fact, giving your children an education that's equivalent to or better than what the public schools offer. That should be no problem. So let's just understand what the inspectors are looking for and that they're right in doing so. If you study the classical liberal arts curriculum, you're going to have no problem with state homeschool inspectors. Our curriculum so far exceeds what's required by the schools that it's not going to be a concern if you actually study every day. If your family is just goofing around and you've got the kids doing chores all day and taking days off, like everybody likes to post pictures on social media and say, hey, look at us, we're at the park. This is homeschooling, haha. Look, that's all fun until the inspector shows up and asks for a portfolio to see what the kids are doing. And you've got a 12-year-old kid who can barely write. You're going to get in trouble. So in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, there's nothing to worry about if you're actually working. You should have an incredible portfolio. All of our courses have hundreds of assignments, tests. All of the lessons can be printed out. All of these things can be put into a portfolio. We provide courses for every subject in the public school curriculum and how many more. We provide an entire curriculum that isn't even available in the public schools. And so if any parent simply works through the curriculum resources that we make available in the academy, how could they ever have a problem with a public school evaluation? What are you going to fail in? Does the child study math? We offer a whole entire K-12 modern mathematics program. It's all there. In addition to that, we offer a whole classical mathematics program. How could you get in trouble for math? When it comes to science, we offer textbooks for the children to study in all of the natural sciences. Besides, as I've said elsewhere, I recommend that for math and science at the high school level, children make use of local community college courses, which are often free to homeschool students. So that's another issue worth talking about. But we also offer a whole classical philosophy program with natural philosophy, natural history, subjects that aren't even available in public or private schools. And then on top of that, what are we going to struggle with? Languages? We offer an entire classical language curriculum in 2 different languages, Latin and Greek, that are not studied for 4 years, but can be studied for the child's entire 12 years of homeschool education. What's next? English, language arts? We offer elementary grammar, classical grammar, English reading, a whole English literature program, English composition. All of the K-12 English requirements are provided for. And on top of that, an entire classical trivium program with Latin, Greek, classical reasoning, classical rhetoric. How would a CLA student ever have a problem with a homeschool evaluation? History, a whole world chronology course, world geography, and an entire multi-year course of history studies that children simply need to work through with assignments, grading, that can all be included in their portfolio. If a homeschool inspector visits the home or looks through a portfolio of any student working in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, they should be overwhelmed by the amount of work that an academy student is doing, and not just 180 days a year, but all year long. You should be able to send them boxes as student portfolios, not mere folders. So the question is just ridiculous whether any homeschool inspector or evaluator from the state would ever have a problem with a Classical Liberal Arts Academy student. Never. There's no way, unless the parents are simply not working and not having study days, and they get caught. And that's their fault. They've got no one to blame but themselves. Certainly can't blame the resources that are available. Parents have to work. There have to be study days. You have to have at least 180 days of school. For the majority of the day, 7 hours or so, 180 days a year. Even in addition to that, we have resources available for children to study piano theory for music, Gregorian chant for music. I just posted a whole set of books for high school art history that could be studied. We have resources available for children to study drawing. There's just no limit to what's available to the kids. I think a lot of the time parents just don't communicate enough and ask questions and let us help. When it comes to the actual specific details of preparing documentation for homeschool evaluations, all you need to do is contact us. We'd be happy to help you to prepare those documents. We'd be happy to help you put together portfolios and things like that. It's just a matter of communicating with us if you need help. But as I said, there's no way that any student making use of the resources available in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy can ever have a concern about a homeschool evaluation. And I think because our program, as I said, is actually quite secular and not really a religious curriculum, I think it will be even more comfortable for homeschool evaluations because it's not based on some questionable religious beliefs, but it's simple, it's straightforward and secular in most of its parts because it's the classical liberal arts. So there should be no concerns for homeschooling requirements. I've never heard of any concerns. I've never heard of parents having trouble with homeschool evaluations. My family has certainly never had any trouble with homeschool evaluations. But if there are any concerns, you should just get in touch with us and let us help. At the very worst, you might have to pay for a consultation meeting that would allow me to spend a whole hour just focused on your stuff and talk you through things and help you get things together. But what would that be? Once a year? That would be necessary at the most. So there's really nothing to worry about. The classical liberal arts curriculum that we offer is not weird. Inspectors have no problem with it. Often the inspectors are people who can't afford to send their children to classical schools. And I mean, if a woman is coming to evaluate your children, she's obviously a working woman who doesn't have the opportunity to be a dedicated stay-at-home mother. And usually these people admire the private classical education that the children are receiving, as long as the parents are doing their job. And that's what it ultimately comes down to. So I hope that can clear up some anxieties. I can say, as a person who's worked in education full-time for 21 years now, that I don't even think twice in a day about any trouble from any kind of state evaluation or regulation or even college admission. It's not an issue if parents know what they're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, you need to ask for help. If you have documentation that you don't understand, you just need to ask for help. What may be difficult for you isn't difficult for us. We do this full time, every day, all day. And like I said, we've been doing this for 20 plus years. So just reach out and get help when you need it. Ask questions, ask for some help, send us documents, email us documents that the state sends you and requires you to fill out, and we can help you fill them out and get them ready and put together any portfolio type stuff that's needed, prepare for evaluations. Never a problem. So I hope that's helpful. Like I said, there should be no concerns for these things with CLAA parents who understand what we're doing, how the curriculum works, and make diligent use of it. If you have questions, either about the big picture, about homeschooling itself in general, about curriculum and choosing courses for your children, you could go on the website and look around. In the left menu of the website, I've prepared recommended course lists for every grade level, which should take a lot of the confusion away. But if you have questions, I'm not asking you to go and dig through the whole website and find answers. Contact us. I'm happy to help. I'll talk to you about all of the details, answer all of your questions. You can call me on the phone. My mobile phone number is 980-699-5575. 980-699-5575. That's the phone in my hand 24 hours a day. If I don't answer, just leave a message. I'll call you back. You can email me at wcm@classicalliberalarts.com or contact me through the website by live chat or create a ticket. So help's available. These things should not be any concern of yours as a Catholic parent unless you're not being honest and you're being lazy and the kids are running loose day after day and there's no schoolwork being done. There's not a school schedule. If you're doing that at home, then you have reason to be concerned. But as long as you're working and doing your best and you have good intentions and love your children, you should never have a problem from the state. I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions, get in touch. God bless.